So we're now going to move on and have the debate around the business market. Graham, what was the title of the session again?
Okay, how are telcos tuning themselves to the needs of the business market?
Exactly. And our first speaker, I'm delighted to welcome to the stage Matt Williams, who's the head of Telstra in the EMEA. Matt, all yours.
Thank you.
You've got to break the mould and use the lectern. I'm lucky in my role. I get to speak to a lot of customers, and what we see is whilst there are immense opportunities evolving from technology, enterprises are having problems either starting their journey or if they are en route, the progress is very slow. And realising the potential is much more about an enterprise level transformation in our view rather than just technology. It's also about people, process and partnerships, which are equally crucial considerations in achieving their goals. And we're seeing that lots of CIOs in Europe are feeling the pressure in terms of delivering new strategies based upon digital transformation. And there is very little demonstration of ROI. We see that only 14% of UK businesses could prove any ROI in digital transformation in 2018. And our own research also shows that 70% of the organizations we spoke to are only at the beginning of their journey. So they're asking us, how can technology help us to drive sales or cut cost or drive competitive advantage? And then the question becomes, how do we fund it? What tech do we have today? What does it need to look like tomorrow? And these questions are much more complex because of the changing technology landscape. So you have cloud and mobility and big data and IoT, which are the trends really offering huge possibility, but they're enabled by 5G and edge compute and infrastructure, platform, software as a service, and SD-WAN and network function virtualization. And there's so much choice and flexibility out there, but it's really only a combination of all of those technologies which drives end-to-end value, and CIOs are responsible for delivering all of that. So delivery is the next question. And what skills do we have? What skills do we need? How do we manage the change? And the complexity of managing legacy whilst delivering that future state quickly and securely and in the right sequence and in a compliant fashion is also very overwhelming. So it's no surprise then to see that 45% more is being spent on consulting within the sector. And CEOs are asking for help with shaping digital transformation vision and mindset. They're asking for help in designing and deploying roadmaps with clear goals and outcomes. And they're looking for help selecting new tech and also prioritizing the right initiatives which drive the most value. So there's clear demand there for us to fulfill. In the meantime, we are experiencing flattening revenues, new market entrants, digitization challenges, CapEx constraint we've heard about today in the face of massive data explosion. And so we've got to look for new opportunities for growth in the market too. And Bain predicts that there will be much more M&A in the sector to increase the breadth and depth of capability in 5G and SD-WAN and security and unified comms, for example, as well as establishing a complete ecosystem of partnerships with public cloud providers and vendors and alliances potentially with other telcos as well. And so if these are the building blocks and the relationships that make up modern enterprise architecture, is the role of the telco to bring in all of the trades to help put those building blocks together. And that's a question we're asking today in our company. And according to Ovum, telcos are investing much more in consulting and partnering skills required to fulfill this demand, where there is value for every party in realizing technology projects and initiatives much more quickly and efficiently. And I think in a future which still sees the telco as owning the relationship with the end user, then these are absolutely critical skills required to deliver that new customer-focused experience, not a technology-focused experience, and to drive the adoption of our core services, which actually is why we're here. And at the same time, we're grappling with change. We're moving from our own legacy and building new platforms and automation and omni-channel interaction and developing new partnerships in the industry. And so if our customers are struggling with their own pace, then perhaps we need to up the pace of change as well in the industry. So I think that whilst enterprises know they either need to start a journey or they're on a journey, it's actually quite dimly lit right now, and it's fraught with obstacles. But this sector has an opportunity to brightly light the way but we must invest in the right people, process, partnerships, and the technology to be credible to do that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Matt. And now we're going to hear from Stephen Hackett, who is the Director of Cloud Solutions Development for ScanSource. So, Stephen. Here he is. Fantastic. Brilliant. The stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matt. Interesting theme on partnerships. I've been in the industry pre-privatization, as a number of us have. In actual fact, I can remember one of the perks of my job was lunchtime, being able to dial and listen to dial-a-disc for free. So it shows you how long I've been involved in the industry. Many years later, I managed to somehow talk my way into the role of the first business internet expert for Cambridge Cable that later became NTL. It was a small group, there were about 12 of us, and we were seen throughout the organisation as those that had enough confidence to talk to our customers about the business of internet, and specifically internet connectivity. Although when I started to go out and have customer conversations, a lot of those customers, by the way, were IT businesses who were buying the services of Cambridge Cable to resell to their customers. I would often sit in front of those end customers with the IT businesses. And I noticed a recurring theme, which would become a theme that I would see throughout my career. And that is that in a lot of cases, a lot of those customers were either looking for features and benefits, technology features, geographic features, pricing that the current provider I was working for, that I was offering, couldn't provide. And so as I went through my career working from telco to telco, carrier to carrier, I saw that as a recurring theme. Back in 2016, I saw the solution for that. And so I started a business for an American organization called Intelisys. We started the European operations, Intelisys Global. And what we created was the UK version of a 25-year-old American model, which is a master agent. A master agent is an organization that aggregates lots of vendor relationships, and there are a number of vendors in the room today that we work with. Now, I see us as I fondly call us the free version of the Gartner Magic Quadrant. Because if you're a business user and you're looking at a new technology, a lot of technologies that telcos, for example, don't offer today, it's the born in the clouds that are offering. Things like software-defined networks, UCAS, CCAS, cloud-based applications. If you're a business user and you're looking to a new technology, you often don't know where to go for that new technology. There are a number of providers that can do that. The Gartner Magic Quadrant is often the first go-to for an enterprise CIO, for example, who looks at that, then thinks, where do I go? What are my next conversations? And that's essentially what we do. We organize and operate a band of trusted advisors who sit in front of customers and help customers wade through the technologies that potentially they could be looking at. And I think that's the challenge of the telco today, that they're in such a dynamic market. Their focus has historically been connectivity and continues to be connectivity, yet it's the born in the clouds that are building the over-the-top applications that the customers need and want for their businesses. And it's not necessarily their focus. So the customer is confused by the choice and by the technologies. And I think that's the challenge of the telcos face today. And that's where we can help our business customers through our advisors understand the technologies available. So that's us. Thank you.
Thank you. We do aim for diversity and different perspectives, as we said in the Great Telco Debate, so I think you'll agree that's a very different perspective on it. And now I'd like to invite to the stage Nigel Stevenson from VMware, to give up. VMware obviously very successful in the virtualization world. Nigel, your perspective on this topic of the business market.
Thanks, Chris. So yeah, when I saw the topic, I started thinking back over a few things that we've been mulling with customers. Start off, just give a bit of a framework. In terms of opportunity value, there's a report I was reading which said, just related to 5G services, the revenue opportunity, the service revenue opportunity globally is something like 1.2 trillion in 2026. Now that's a very big number by any imagination, but it breaks down into different industries. So at the top of the list, it's something like 20% each. You've got utilities, energy as a combined 20%, and manufacturing. So they're at the top of the list. And then actually what surprised me, coming towards the bottom of that list, less than 10% was public services and automation, which surprised me because I thought that would be, automotive, which I thought would be higher than that. But the point is there's obviously service opportunity, service revenue opportunity out there, and I think it's fairly well understood, and this is something I'd like to explore, is that to get that opportunity, there's a certain amount of verticalization of services that needs to take place. Now the challenge from an operator point of view, and maybe I'll be a bit controversial here, the elephant in the room is that the service revenues and the brand value is typically not with the telco. This has been mentioned a few times. I thought the gentleman from Google got a really, really good time earlier. I thought it could have been a lot more cruel on that side, because it's the over-the-top providers undoubtedly have got the brand value. And I remember having conversations many years ago. The time that you think of an operator is when a service isn't working. You think, oh, the network's failing. It may well not be the network. The network might be fantastic, but it was touched on earlier. How do you sell the brand value of the service you're operating as a network provider? And it's very, very difficult, because it's difficult to understand as a consumer, and it's equally difficult to understand as an enterprise, because it's an invisible sort of value. So to make this work, you really need to as an operator, you need to create value in the infrastructure, and you need to monetize the infrastructure, because if you don't monetize the infrastructure, it just becomes a cost that the primary competitor doesn't have, right? So you're not going to solve the problem unless you can monetize the infrastructure. So then that comes on to where can that value come from? And I think there are levers to pull, if you like. There are enablers out there. I think, we talk about 5G, we talk about network slicing, we talk about the edge. I think the combination of those three undoubtedly deliver a capability to add value inherent in the infrastructure in a way that non-operators can't do. You can't change the speed of light. That dictates being close to the customer. Operators are close to the customer. That opens up opportunity for services. You can, whether that's a latency thing, whether it's a local compute, whether it's data aggregation at the edge, there are things you can do because of the physical characteristics of the infrastructure. The trick, of course, is how do you attach value to those? So I think, and what I'd like to maybe explore on this panel is there are ways I think you can attach value, but the value has to become more vertical. It has to be more specific to the industry you're serving. And I think the question for me is, to what extent can an operator verticalize services and getting close to the customer? And that's typically not been a telco's forte. How close do you need to get to the customer to offer a vertical service that genuinely delivers brand value and resonates with that customer, be that customer an industry, a particular enterprise organization, but it's a kind of personalized level of service. How do you deliver that? And to what extent do you need to dig into the understanding and work with that customer or with that industry sector? And from that, will the market evolve where we have operators that specialize in maybe 2 or 3 verticals or sub-verticals? Obviously, we take some of those things like manufacturing, there's subcategories within that. Do operators try and verticalize to the level of saying, we'll be expert and proficient in 2 or 3 particular areas, and that's where we'll get our differentiation, and go narrow and deep? Or do you go more broad and shallow and try and create capabilities that then different industries, different enterprises can then consume as a service? And one area that might work is in development, providing services at the edge of the network that developers can use to develop their own service offerings, or vendors can develop offerings for various industry use cases. So there's a kind of, is it narrow and deep, or is it broad and shallow? But I think ultimately, getting closer to the customer and being more involved in the customer's processes has to become part of the telco offering, leveraging things like slicing through 5G, being physically close to the customer through edge computing and so on, and using those as levers to be able to create the resonance with that end customer market. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Yeah, very interesting and thought-provoking. And now we have somebody who I have not seen, I think, for 14 years, who I worked with at the beginning of UK broadband. He's kept his hair. I didn't keep my hair. Here is Paul Adams, who is the Director of Field Marketing for Europe for Nokia. Hello, Paul. Hi.
I've gone grey, though. I'm doing the lectern thing like you. I heard interactivity is welcomed here. Who remembers what the relationship between these two things is? Go on. So those of you who don't remember, or who don't know, this is the compact cassette, which is arguably the least future-proof technology in the history of the world. Its decline is spectacular. It went from 442 million units to 34,000 units sold between 1990 and 2009. That's a decline of 99.9923% in 19 years. When I think about the technology that I had when I first joined the telecoms industry, much has changed. A friend of mine said a couple of years ago that my daughter, who's 12 now, would never buy a CD. That's the technology that obviously killed, because he said it was obsolete. He said that's the technology that killed the compact cassette. He was wrong about that. But what's perhaps interesting, I like this analogy because it's something that shows the speed of change. Because I think we don't see that. We're so involved in the industry, we don't see the speed of change. And I just, clearly we don't sell CDs, but in the old days, technology used to be tested in an enterprise before it made it to the consumer. And that isn't the case anymore, as we know. It's quite the reverse. But the question here is whether service providers, I hate the phrase telco, by the way, because it's synonymous with a telephone company to me, are tuning themselves to the business market. I would argue that they've never become completely detuned, because if they had, they would have gone out of business. Allow me to expand on that. I might be wearing a Nokia badge today, but my background is very firmly in the CSP space. I started my career at Cable & Wireless as a trainee, well actually Mercury, and I was the 25th employee at Colt, so I've been around a while. And these were both companies that were very firmly focused on the enterprise space. Why? Well, because that's where the best margins are. As an old boss of mine used to say, why do robbers rob banks? Because that's where the money is. However, to my point about change and obsolescence, telecom stuff just isn't the same anymore. And what we're seeing, the speed of change is only accelerating. We only need to look about how quickly 5G has reached some form of adoption. It's really come out of nowhere in real terms in relation to how quickly technologies in the past were adopted. I would argue that it's the speed of change that has caught out some of the service providers. Today, the debate in the enterprise is often about the relative merits of buy versus build. That is being driven by how new technology is more democratized and accessible than it perhaps was before, but also because the CSPs haven't really been listening that closely to their customers, haven't been listening closely to their needs for a long time. Also, the technology develops faster and perhaps the service development cycles of the CSPs can cope with, which is a bit ironic really, because much of the technology is about service agility and they're still not adopting it as quickly as they could. To take 18 months or more to launch a service doesn't cut it anymore. When the customer has the opportunity to build their own as an option and the window of opportunity is limited. Long service development cycles will often miss a market opportunity, which is what we may see with fixed wireless access, which has a window open now, but that will significantly reduce over time as fibre rolls out. Private LTE is another good case in point. While there are lots of fundamental questions to be answered, such as spectrum allocation and neutral host models, there are lots of discussions in train, but how this model will eventually pan out is still very much fluid. In the US, as we know, spectrum is being reallocated for private usage where the CSPs aren't using it themselves. However, in the case of private wireless, because the service need varies so wildly between the types of enterprise, this creates a headache for the CSP. An airport, for example, requires a certain wireless footprint that is bigger than, say, a campus, but it needs the ability to deliver multi-service capability that a campus doesn't need. There is little doubt that the ability of the enterprise to take and deploy technology on their own, such as private wireless, represents an opportunity for companies like Nokia. From power grids in Brazil to ports in Hamburg and so on, we have 120 deployments worldwide overall, so that would prove the case. However, in my heart, I do believe that although some organisational rejuvenation is needed within the CSPs, there will always be a place for them, because fundamentally, there is no one who knows better how to run a network And now, from what I'm seeing, they're listening to their customers more closely again. Thank you.
Take a few.
Thank you very much, Paul. Right, have a seat. Right, so the motion before us, ladies and gentlemen, is business customers don't trust the telcos. Paul doesn't like that word, but business customers don't trust the telcos to support their digital initiatives. And speaking in favour of this motion is Chris, and against the motion is me. So, Chris,
Thank you very much, Graham. And ladies and gentlemen, in terms of this discussion, I think for many years the role of the CSPs, Paul, to your point, was to actually connect buildings and people, and also we're moving towards things. The digital journeys that enterprises are now launching, well, not just enterprises, but all businesses. And to Matt's point, they feel they're at the beginning of that journey. They need help on that journey. That journey is not just about connectivity. In fact, in many ways, it's analogous to the journey that many of the CSPs that we'll talk to after lunch are also facing, bringing together not only their networking and their IT side, but also the business process and the flows of business and the emergence of new business models in B2B to X. So, and I think as Stephen pointed out for the ScanSource model, the master agent model, there is the salespeople from the telcos are obviously pitching to sell their particular brand of connectivity, but actually putting the choice in front of them, the channel that we might call it, and in addition to organisations like Stephen's, like ScanSource, of course there's a whole plethora of channels out there who've been working with many of these businesses for many years, and the integrators as well, all of whom are much closer to the way those businesses are run. And the fact of the matter is that, to Nigel's point, that understanding that vertical knowledge, the way in which businesses work within different industries, and all the way down from the largest enterprises down to the smallest, I think it is such a tall order that I think the trust is not there. There is a need for a channel, there is a need for an intermediary, and there is a need for the telecoms, the CSPs, to actually adapt to this emerging model and think much more about the channel and turn the model on its head and actually think about who's the business customer listening to, who are their advisors, and how can we better work with those organisations. That is the way in which trust will be built as connectivity becomes part of the solution. Connectivity was the solution when we were connecting buildings. Connectivity is now part of the solution as we move into this digital environment. Mr. Wild.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I urge you to...
By the way, he gets louder when he's not so sure.
No, I urge you to oppose this motion for reasons which I'm just about to try and think about. Yes, okay, good. Now, I've got it. So, we have heard in the Great Telco Debate over the 6 years that we've been running the debate, we've heard numerous presentations which demonstrated that actually business customers think very little of their telcos. And I will concede that point to my friend on the other side of the stage. But I put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, that we are at a turning point now. We are at a turning point. And I can prove that to you because if you look at organisations such as Telefonica, such as even in the UK, even Three, for example, they are investing heavily in private networks. They are partnering with manufacturing companies, with airports, with ports to deploy those kinds of networks. And to Nigel's point earlier, is that a deep understanding of a particular vertical or a kind of horizontal? Well, it's kind of both, because in a sense, it's a bunch of Lego building blocks which can be rearranged and deployed in a different way for each vertical. So they have that vertical relationship, but they have a set of common building blocks which they are deploying. There will always be a place. There will always be a place, as Chris points out, for in the middle of the market for distributors, dealers, IT, systems integrators, and so on, to have a close relationship with particular companies in the middle of the market. But I put it to you that at the top end and at the bottom end, through digitization, through a greater focus on consulting, and through a bunch of new technologies, that there is going to be a transformation, and telcos will be trusted with the digital initiatives of businesses. So I urge you to oppose the motion. Thank you very much.
That's not the motion. The motion is trust,
Oh,
not will trust.
come on.
Yeah?
You're splitting hairs.
Absolutely, I am.
Right, so
Two zip down. So.
would we like to hear from any of our expert witnesses? Do you have anything more to say, having heard the motion and the arguments?
Okay, I'll go first. So if the conversation's about trust, then I mean, you could say, I would say this because it's my biggest customer in the UK. BT is one of the most trusted brands in the country. And one of the things I was doing a speaking slot once, and because I get fed up with people beating up BT, and I said, everyone hates BT, but when did your phone last go wrong? And normally it works, but in this one occasion, this guy put his hand up and went, yesterday, which was a bit of a problem. But the point is, it's a trusted brand, and I think that trust still remains today, personally.
Super.
I would agree too, just sharing the perspective from another incumbent, albeit in Australia, but Telstra is a hugely recognised brand, 99.9% brand awareness in Australia, and so many use cases already in agriculture, in utilities, in automotive, where we're using IoT for strategic reasons. But our role is very much about providing that infrastructure underneath, and the decisions as to what is viable, what the right business cases are very much led by the customer. It's just about being able to play a part in that decision-making process and the project and initiatives at large.
Super. Okay, Stephen, do you think businesses trust telcos with their digital initiatives?
Well, I think what's interesting, as we see that separation of the network from the application, we're seeing an emergence of born-in-the-cloud providers. The telco is still important as part of the delivery of the total solution. For the network, for example, I think what we need to see from the telcos, what consumers, business consumers really need to see, and they're interested in is honesty, transparency. Because as more applications move to the cloud, the business consumer is interested in a resilient network. So they want to speak to different network providers that can give them those options. So if you've got a single network provider in the relationship with the customer, then you could suggest that what the customer will see is the answer they're looking for from that telco. Whereas with our model, it means that we're the customer's advocate. We're able to wade through that Gartner Magic Quadrant of different technology providers and provide that customer with the solution they're looking for. So I think it's about honesty and transparency. The telcos need a closer relationship with the customers. They just need a vehicle in which to experience that.
Super.
I think I think we're violently agreeing here, but I don't think it's a question of trust per se. I think we're moving into a new era here. If we look at things like reliability that are coming through from 5G, if we look at the increased level of automation, which takes a lot of that potential risk out of deploying services, the tool set is there to provide what I would call more personalised services which will resonate more with specific areas of the customer base. I think that the tool set is either there or very closely there. The challenge is going to be, how do you then relate that to the customer? So it's almost more of a sales motion and a go-to-market and demonstrating an understanding of the customer's business. Because I think the tools are behind it. We've got assurance, we've got automation, we've got slicing, we've got the ability to do it, and we've got the ability, I think, to prove that it can be done reliably. But have we got the understanding to know exactly what we have to deliver in order for the customer to say, yes, I understand that, I get that. I don't think the trust is the major thing in this case. I think it's probably skill sets and sales motions.
I would agree with that completely. And just to add to that, we see that our sellers have fewer opportunities to talk to our customers. And that's because they're really well empowered. I mean, they've got the internet, they understand the marketplace and the capabilities of the marketplace out there. What they really need help with are their challenges, the complexities around delivering, selecting technology. And so if you go and you talk telco, you talk product, then you'll be condemned to selling commodity. If you go and try and understand their business, then there's an opportunity to build trust and credibility. And that requires different skills that we need to invest in.
Super. Okay, so let's open it to the floor. And here we have our first question down here at the front. My glamorous assistant is coming with the microphone.
Hi there, I'm Patrick from Hardenstance. I wanted to pick up on Nigel's comments with respect to his $1.2 trillion and elephants in the room. And I wanted to raise one particular elephant in the room in terms of that 1.2 trillion or whatever that vast number's intended to be. For all of those logistics companies, mines, factories, whatever those companies are, healthcare businesses, to spend anything remotely like that is going to require sign-off on the business case by a character that rarely gets brought into these conversations, and that character is the Enterprise Chief Information Security Officer, the Enterprise CISO. And in all of the discussions that we have as an industry around that critical player in the ecosystem is simply not raised. He or she never gets a look in. And I will make a prediction as to how this is going to go. For the next year or two, we'll continue ignoring that person. In a couple of years' time, we'll suddenly realise, oh shit, we need to talk to that person. And then we will present ourselves to that person with our tablets of stone, which will say, here, we have security for you. And then it'll take us a couple of years to realise that that's actually the wrong thing, and that actually what we need to do is go to that enterprise CSO and say, oh, sorry about that, what do you need us to do to enable you to sign off on this business case that we were really excited about 5 years ago, but we still haven't delivered on? So I just wanted to put that character on the table because he or she is enormously important and nobody ever talks about them.
Super, thank you for that. Any response from up here on that one?
Only that I would agree, and I know I've spoken to Patrick before, I mean, that is an evolving area, I think, still. And I think as an industry, we're still, I know from our point of view, from a VMware point of view, and you're very familiar with some of the security components that exist across the various parts of the infrastructure, but I don't think as an industry we've yet got to the point where we've understood how to combine all of those in a way that then can be articulated, not just articulated, but implemented across end-to-end type services or edge services, whatever they might be, for a particular use case. So I think that is still a work in progress. I know from our point of view it is something we're putting a lot of focus on. And I think maybe as we get a better understanding of what the use cases turn out to be from a service context, that might help shape how we apply that security. Again, it's coming back to what I said earlier. I think there are a lot of tools in the toolbox, but they're not necessarily being combined right at the moment for the particular use case that CSPs have, which is different from a typical enterprise environment. But there are overlaps. So
can I turn it back on you, Patrick, a little bit? In terms of those CSOs within the business that you talk to, and since security is your speciality, I think we should acknowledge that.
Thank you for the plug, Chris.
Thank you. That's all right. No problem. Anytime. Are those people aware of what this digital explosion will do to their security, or are they still focused back on the data centers and that? Do they have a broader knowledge? Is this also an education issue and an opportunity, of course, for the CSPs to educate them about the changes in this environment?
I think it's a halfway house. I think both parties are reaching out to one another, particularly from a 5G perspective. But for the most part, it's the telcos talking about it. I don't know that a lot of enterprise CISOs have got that far along in terms of actually spending a great deal of time looking at how to implement it, simply because the tool sets from the telcos are not there yet. 5G slicing, all that good stuff, that's a long way away from being realisable. So they've got a familiarity with it, but they're not in the business of being able to specify what they need just yet because the network's not there yet.
Well, I think the fact, to Matt's point, they're at the beginning of that journey, that digitalisation journey. Therefore, they can't possibly embrace everything at the moment. They're sort of feeling their way. Graham, do you have any more questions?
I think we do. Yes, lady down here at the front.
And then, Graham, say cloud to me afterwards.
Hi. I think you asked the wrong question, Paul, when you said, has your phone gone wrong? What you could have asked is, has anyone here had any trouble when they moved house, moved business, upgraded, had a billing query, or any of the other things that the telcos don't do so well at? And I think you'd find there'd be a different response to that. And I've personally experienced it when I tried to change service, and it took me 9 calls to the provider to actually get it correct. So I think if they can't get the very basics like billing, installation of stuff they've been doing for decades and decades, how can the business customers trust them with their digital initiatives?
Thank you.
It's a very good point.
It was a joke, though. Can I?
No, I know.
Can I just make the point?
We have a chat.
But actually, and it's a point I've made in previous debates. When I was running one of the smaller research houses here in Europe, and spending enormous amounts of money because it was the days before broadband, it was so a lot of dial-up connections. We spent a fortune with the telco. I never once had an account person, a salesperson, or come and talk to me and say, "Are you happy with the service?" So I think there is, and it's that interaction point that Stephen's touched upon, we've all touched upon, this vast array from large enterprise down to small business. The contact point is becoming increasingly digital, and should we even have to make a phone call to get that response? But the point, Graham, the point I wanted to introduce as well into this discussion was the notion of cloud and the cloud players. We touched upon some of the hyperscalers in the opening debate. I'm disturbed to a certain degree by what we're beginning to see from some of the hyperscale players now, in that their offerings, that they are in many cases replacing the telcos in terms of the global reach of their networks, and by purchasing direct internet access into those clouds, are actually bypassing many of the traditional business type services. I can't remember who said framing earlier. Was it you, Paul, mentioned framing earlier? But
I've been around long enough.
Those old expensive services, the web scale guys are creeping into this market from a connectivity point of view. Obviously, there's still business for the telcos in there, but in some ways, we appear to trust those players more than we do the telcos. I thought I'd throw that into the pot just to underpin my side of the argument.
So can I just say congratulations on getting it done in only 9 calls. That's very good. I think you're 50% of the average. Right, so gentleman at the back there.
Yes, I wanted to congratulate on that as well. It's stolen my thunder there. So my name is Artur Kwiatkowski. I run Siena's monetization practice in EMEA, and I really resonated with the vertical message that Nigel had. Pretty much every telco that we work with and help them go to market with their services think that a 10 gig E is a 10 gig E is a 10 gig E. They don't think of it in the context of, I don't know, this being an MRI backhaul or backup link or and the challenge is not necessarily in the technology that's being used or being delivered. The challenge very often is more in the front end of the business, so how the sales teams are enabled. And funnily enough, I think across most bigger telcos, the finance teams are the ones that get the most of that value or that message, because that's where the most money is essentially for enterprise stuff. Now, in terms of a second point to make, in terms of the trust, I think the problem may be in that telco is only a part of the solution. And so invariably, I think where the industry is going is towards more of an ecosystem type setup, where the telco will be delivering stuff shoulder to shoulder with other people, systems integrators, cloud players, and so on and so forth. There's a reason, for instance, why Verizon has let go of its data center business, AT&T has let go of their data center business. It just, that cloud thing is a really good case in point that's actually, enterprises maybe don't necessarily trust telcos in delivering other stuff than connectivity, right?
Super, thank you. Any more? Yes, madam, third lady from Verizon.
So our customers do trust us. We recognize, as AT&T did as well, that we can't compete with AWS and Microsoft. So in fact, we're partnering with them. So I know that we just recently announced it at reInvent, the partnership with Verizon and AWS to provide edge computing services. So that was that came directly out of our recognition that we're better together, and it's definitely a developer's play and an enterprise play. So it's not particularly a consumer play.
Super, thank you very much.
I think for the ARPUs they spend in the US, they should trust you.
So Preeti is going to have it's a long throw. No, don't risk it.
Can we get a rugby ball next year?
Not a good catcher. I think the big question is liability. 2 scenarios. Let's say a banking application fails. Who's held liable, the bank or the operator? And in the future, if you were to take another application that could have to do with e-health or health, who is liable? Would it be Apple's medical care app distributed through AWS or Verizon, the carrier? I think we need to think about that as well. And that goes on. I could replicate that in every use case, in every vertical.
I mean, that brings up a whole load of contractual issues as well as issues of reputational damage and what kind of appetite telcos have got for either of those things, or the risks around them. Yes, sir, at the back in the white shirt.
Hi, Gordon Rawling, Huawei. One observation, I guess, or one reinforcement and one observation. I think it needs to come back to the issue of trust. And as human beings, we base trust on certain tangible and intangible things. And in putting that in a business context, you need to invest into those tangible and intangible things. Telstra has made a decision to invest into health, a very risky sector which very few others are doing, but they've invested to try and expand the brand because people know Telstra, but they don't know it for health. Sorry to pick on Telstra, but I think really interesting what you're doing there. So I think we've got to think about if we want to go and get trust, it's not trust as a generic horizontal brand, it's trust in the context of the engagement that they people want. So we need to think about that and have we got the cash to do it. The other thing which is, I think, potentially a bit more positive, for good or for bad, I think we're in an interesting time of geopolitics where regional, country-based relationships, industry strategies, investments are coming to the fore. And I actually think it's a great time for the traditional service providers or telcos, the BTs, the Telstras, where there's a very emotional connection in that country to potentially offer something different. Like I say, for good or bad, it's a different political conversation, but I think there is a real opportunity there for those legacy brands which do have personal trust to extend that brand. So that's a bit more of a positive point.
Good point. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, gentleman down here in the middle.
Hello, John Vickery from BT. So I speak to a lot of business customers, and it's just really an observation that I don't think for the business customer it's simply a question of trust. That's why we have contracts with SLAs, because if they trusted us, oh no, just get on with it, you know, we don't need a contract. It's more a question about confidence of can you deliver the business outcomes. And I was speaking to a customer just yesterday evening who were talking about their technical debt that they've accrued over a number of years of these digital initiatives that they've gone without telcos involved, and it's turned into a black hole where they're just pouring money down the drain. If we're a business, a telco who can offer assurance through contractual SLAs to deliver the outcomes that the business needs, and we can give them that confidence, then absolutely they will trust us and continue to work with us on those digital initiatives.
Good. Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Yes, gentleman. We'll go with the gentleman right at the back in the corner there. We haven't heard from you, I don't think. There we are.
So a couple of important points. I think there was a mention around trust, and I think trust with trust also comes security. The consumer experience may be very different than the enterprise experience because, like everybody else, telcos or CSPs are also coin operated. A business spends a lot more money with the telco, so the trust and the experience they are going to get is far better than an average consumer. So I sympathize with the 9 calls, but that's the normal. Going back to, I think Preeti actually raised an important point, liability. And liability, the ability to actually hold accountable in terms of where and what went wrong for the CSPs is important. And that's why those enterprise businesses actually build that relationship. It comes with relationship and engagement. And the more the CSPs engage, the better relationships they can build. The better relationships they can build, the better trust they can build. We've had this conversation of trust with every generation of technology. When Frame Relay, with IP networks, with cloud providers, and now look where we are. It takes just time to build that particular trust, and then business becomes the table stakes.
Super, thank you. I think, just looking at my time here, I think it's time for us to vote on this.
I was about to wrap it up. Mr. Parsons.
Okay. Do you want a few wrapping up comments, Chris, before we vote?
No, I think we're about. I'm sure people they're smelling lunch drifting in through the door at the back.
Do you trust us to provide you the lunch? That's the question.
Do you trust us to get all the information? Yes, Ross, please.
Right, okay, good. Excellent session. I think we all know how this works now. Those in favour of the motion go green. Those against the motion go red. In the event of a tie, I've been asked to point out, Varley at the back there gets a deciding vote. Okay, vote now, please. Ooh, that's closer. That's going to the Greens. Again, but by a very slight margin, I would say that time. Very slight.
Excellent.
Motion carried.
Punctuality is the name of the game in telco debate. Please stick with that. Thank you for your short questions. Thank you, panel. Graham, thank you for the morning. See you all after lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.